Selfie gate and idiocy itself continues. Folks, just when you think the right wing can't stoop any lower, just when you think they can't scrape the bottom of the barrel, further humiliate themselves even more, go to even greater lengths and stretches to create something out of nothing, they've outdone themselves. Now, the huge controversy of the day is this idea that it's somehow an outrage that Obama took a picture of himself with the Danish Prime Minister and the British Prime Minister, as if that were a horrible sin. Now, a little context. The president over in Europe talking to the Prime Minister, the Danish Prime Minister, and the British Prime Minister, and lo and behold, the Danish Prime Minister is like, I'm getting a picture of this. She pulls out her phone and takes a picture. Obama did what many of us do in that situation. You reciprocate. You're human. Because if somebody takes your picture and you don't want to take their picture, you're kind of saying, you're not as important as I am. I mean, how many times have we, I know I've done this myself. Finishing a speaking engagement or something, and maybe I'm not crazy about having a picture with this person I don't know, but they've taken a picture of me. I'll take a picture, or someone else takes a picture of it. The idea that this is somehow a scandal, that's a real scandal. The idea that somebody has nothing to do better than to point on just a normal, human, decent, ordinary act and try to inflate this into something egregious. The bizarre thing about this is coming from conservatives who worship at the altar of Ronald Reagan. Now, we're supposed to think this is awful about Barack Obama because he's so self-absorbed, so egomaniacal, that of all the pictures he has of a White House photographer, he has to take another picture. Let me remind you, folks, Ronald Reagan was so vain, he had his little Hollywood hairdressers march into the White House every other Tuesday, dye his hair, put the little thing around you and paint, put all sorts of brown chocolate-covered dye on his head. And that's how he had to spend an hour of his day every 2 weeks. And, that doesn't make Ronald Reagan an awful person, but it sure as heck makes him a lot more egotistical and vain than anything Barack Obama has ever done. Interesting news coming out of the GOP. They are trying to change their process for selecting presidents. So the GOP is exerting more control over their primary process. They're trying to limit the number of debates, and you could certainly make the case, although I don't think that was the primary reason the Republicans lost, that at some point there were too many debates going on. And they want to limit who can be the panelists. So presumably they don't want any CNN Candy Crowleys asking tough questions. Get this, they're floating the idea that Mark Levin and Sean Hannity are going to be the moderators of the Republican primary debate. I hope so. Let Mark Levin paint these people into such an extreme right-wing corner they can never get out. I think that would be great. Word of caution for the Republican Party, though. Your problem is not that you had too many debates or that you had tough questions or mean questions from reporters. Your problem is you had profoundly lousy candidates, and you had a right-wing extremist rabble voting base that eliminated people like former Governor Tim Pawlenty. Now, when you look at the Republicans' playbook for success over the last 50 years, when is the last time they lost the presidency when they put forth someone who had been elected governor, been re-elected governor, and had governed successfully without scandal? When's the last time they lost with that? Let me give you a hint. Never. And yet the Republicans looked at people like Tim Pawlenty and it was just, we don't like you. You're not foaming at the mouth enough. You're not extremist enough. We'd much rather have a demagogue like Herman Cain or a complete imbecile, a Sarah Palin Jr. varsity like Michelle, what's her name? I can't even bear to say her name anymore. I'm so over Michelle Bachmann. So that's the Republican Party's real problem. It's not the debates. It's not that there were tough questions. It's that you had a lot of awful candidates and a whole lot of ugly, nasty, bloodthirsty voters out there. Till you change that, you're in trouble. Wow, this is really fantastic. Everyone talks about how, well, the Republicans have extremists in their party and the Tea Party's more extreme, and people that, you and I would have considered very, very conservative for a long time, people like Lindsey Graham, are now being challenged by people who were so extreme they consider Lindsey Graham essentially a liberal. Now, to get a sense of this, to give you a flavor, let's check in with the Republican opponent of Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. Here's some of the things he said recently. He said that basically anyone who is able-bodied and isn't working shouldn't be able to eat. That's what he said. And that immigrants should self-deport. That, again, these get rid of all food stamps. People just shouldn't be allowed to eat. That's his idea of what a democracy. This guy is a state senator, Lee Bright, and he's on record. You can go to allen.com and see this, where he says, if you don't have a job, you should not eat. I mean, this guy is extreme. He says that anyone who helps in South Carolina with the president implement Obamacare should go to jail. He wants the state to have its own currency. He has joked about secession. Folks, I am somehow painted as extreme when I point out just basic, obvious facts that one American political party has been taken over by radical extremists who really are not a part of an American democracy tradition. They are radical extremists. They are dangerous. They don't fundamentally believe in democracy. And that's just sort of pushed off as, well, that's just standard rhetoric from the left and the right. They're all the same. No, folks. There's nobody on the so-called left. There's no Democratic state senator saying, let's just hang rich people. If we can't have our way, let's secede from the Union. I mean, there just aren't prominent elected Democrats making outlandish statements like this from the so-called left. This is not a situation where there are extremes in both parties. We have one party that's moderate and occasionally does a few liberal things and nothing left-wing. And we have another party that's been completely taken over by radical extremists. Well, here's a surprise for you. According to Media Matters, the news coverage of Obamacare has been overwhelmingly negative. They slice it, dice it. Basically, every story about Obamacare has been negative. Now, lost in all this is the fact that the status quo health care of 40 million Americans not having any health care, that doesn't get coverage. The fact that Americans pay twice as much as health care for their health care as any other Western democracy, that doesn't get coverage. The fact that Republicans came up with Obamacare and were such despicable liars, they claim now they had nothing to do with it, that doesn't get coverage. The only thing, for the most part, that's gotten news coverage is Republican talking points of, aha, there's this problem, this huge, huge problem. You've come up with a solution. Your solution isn't perfect, so we're going to talk about the hiccups along the way. And this is a sad, pathetic, despicable situation by the mainstream media being completely hijacked by Republican talking points. Now, the good folks at Media Matters have plotted this out in a chart. For example, ABC World News, 68% negative towards Obamacare, 0% positive, 32% mixed. Brian Williams, 62% negative on Obamacare, 38% mixed, 0 positive. CBS News, 46% negative, 44 mixed, a mere 10% positive. Utterly despicable the way our news media has been hijacked. So now it's time to get cute. Senator Rand Paul, who's been caught repeatedly committing serious acts of plagiarism, now is citing Popeye in the footnotes of his speeches so that nobody can accuse me of plagiarizing. Folks, the problem, well, there's a couple of problems here. Number one, when you're quoting Popeye, most people can figure it out, number one. Number two, when you're holding yourself out as a national leader, somebody of presidential timber, and you can't think of anyone better to quote than Popeye, that's an even bigger problem. Well, isn't this interesting? The party of traditional values, the party of trying to keep those liberal Democrats from destroying our traditional families. Guess who they had in their employ? There is a gentleman who is the chief of staff to Senator Lamar Alexander, Ryan Laskar. Chief of staff, that means he's essentially the chief operating officer of the entire Senate's staff, which is typically dozens, could reach 100 sometimes. This is the highest level position you can have on Capitol Hill if you're not an elected member of Congress. Lo and behold, he's a child pornographer. So when he's helping Republicans with their talking points about these evil liberals and their lack of morals, he's at home downloading child pornography. He was arrested, charged earlier this week. Let's hope this guy has what's coming to him. Now, I will say this about Lamar Alexander. He is a particular sad case in the Republican Party because when you look at how Lamar Alexander governed when he was the governor of Tennessee, it was essentially the same as Bill Clinton did. They were in office about the same time. Back in the late 70s, they had much in common. They were allies. And Lamar Alexander focused on the same things Bill Clinton did. Build education, have the government, through taxation, redistribute wealth so that poor kids and middle-class kids can have decent education, therefore we can attract jobs. So he was about education and jobs. Nary a right-wing social extremist bone in his body. And unfortunately, Lamar Alexander quickly figured out, after a couple of failed bids for the presidency, that stuff isn't cutting it anymore. If you want to be in the Republican Party, you have to embrace all sorts of right-wing extremism and terrorism if you want to be considered legitimate. And Lamar Alexander, as far as I can tell, hasn't accomplished anything since he made this ideological shift. Because truth be told, he was a good governor of Tennessee. And since then, in his bids for presidency, in his time as a senator, he's accomplished basically nothing. I'm TJ Walker. Thanks for joining me. If you have any topics you'd like us to analyze here, please post them here. Any comments, any disagreements, your opinions are welcome. Thanks.